The morning sun rose slow and honey-gold over Lone Creek, brushing the dusty earth with a warmth that felt like a memory rather than a start. In that drifting light walked Nayeli Greywind, a 20-year-old native woman, slender as a reed and carrying a small bundle of pans and a single wooden spoon tied against her hip. Each step she took seemed stitched with quiet hope, though hope's thread was thin these days and frayed easily under the weight of hungry mornings. She paused in front of the town's general store, dust swirling around her ankles like shy ghosts, and gathered the courage to knock again, wondering if today would be different. The shopkeeper opened the door just enough to let out the smell of flour and stale tobacco before giving her a flat look. Her voice remained steady as she asked for work, any work, especially in a kitchen, but the man's lips tightened as if her very presence unsettled the air. He muttered something about no space and closed the door before she could finish her sentence, and she found herself staring at her reflection faintly warped in the window glass. She turned away as laughter drifted from the saloon, carried by those who had seen her ask the same question yesterday and the day before, and she felt a quiet ache bloom behind her ribs as she stepped back into the dusty road. She made her way toward the old stone bakery, the one place she still hoped might see her differently. Nayeli approached Mrs. Calder with her heart open but guarded, offering her cooking skills the way a traveler offers bread to a stranger, timid but pure. The older woman only looked her over, eyes sharp as needles, and said she had no need for Indians messing up her kitchen, the words stinging more than the heat of any oven ever could. Nayeli whispered a soft thank you anyway before retreating, clutching her wooden spoon the way a child clutches a promise, wondering how long a promise could survive in a world that mocked the dreams of the wanderer. By noon, the sun pressed heavy on her shoulders as she walked past the ranches on the outskirts of town, nearly ready to return to the abandoned barn where she sometimes slept. Yet something inside her asked her to try once more, just once more, before letting the day win. When she turned toward the Reyes ranch, she felt a strange flutter, half fear, half curiosity, wondering what kind of man lived beyond the weathered fence that leaned like an old storyteller tired of holding secrets. She hesitated at the gate, then knocked on the ranch house door, dust rising gently around her boots like the earth wanted to listen in. The door opened, revealing Colton Reyes, a 30-year-old cowboy, tall in stature and quiet in presence, with eyes the warm, tired color of evening campfire smoke. He looked at her not with suspicion but with an almost startled calm, the kind you feel when a melody you'd forgotten suddenly returns. She explained that she was searching for cooking work, voice soft but carrying a quiet dignity that made him look at her longer than he meant to. He didn't question her or ask where she came from. He simply stepped aside and said, "If you can cook better than what I make myself, then you're already hired," before realizing how much that simple sentence shifted the air between them. Nayeli followed him inside, her heartbeat matching the swing of the door, unsure if she had stepped into luck or another kind of disappointment. The kitchen surprised her. Sturdy wooden counters, dusty pots hanging like sleeping bats, and a small slice of morning light slipping through the curtain as though greeting her. She began to cook with a careful, reverent silence, using the last bit of flour in the tin and the small slab of beef found at the back of the pantry. As the aroma of warm bread and simmering broth filled the cabin, Colton paused mid-stride, struck by how the scent felt like something returning home after a long absence, and he wondered why this ordinary moment suddenly mattered to him. He tasted her food with the slow caution of a man who has eaten alone for too many years, and as soon as he did, a softness washed across his face. It wasn't just good, it felt human, comforting, as if it carried every memory she had lost and every hope she still guarded. For a moment, he forgot the sound of silence that usually lived in this home. She looked away, embarrassed by how closely he studied her cooking, while he found himself wondering how long she had carried such talent unseen. Before he could speak, a voice outside called his name, and the two of them turned toward the window as the echo of gossip reached their ears like a distant storm. Word traveled faster in Lone Creek than the wind itself. By the next morning, the townsfolk whispered about the Indian girl, cooking in Colton's home. Some said she had bewitched him, others joked she was only pretending to seek work so she could trap him into marriage. Groups of women near the wells clucked their tongues, men at the saloon laughed with cruel delight, and the sheriff's wife muttered that no decent man hires a girl like that without wanting something more. Each whisper scraped at Naeli's heart the way sand scrapes against tender skin, and each day became harder to step into town without feeling the weight of their judgment hanging over her like a storm cloud. One afternoon, after delivering fresh bread to Colton's porch, she overheard two ranch hands snickering about her, claiming she was trying to drive the cowboy mad with her cooking, until he'd have no choice but to marry her. Their voices cut through her composure, and she rushed behind the barn, shoulders shaking as she finally allowed the hurt to spill out. She slid to the ground, hugging her pans close as if the metal could shield her, and she whispered her mother's teachings to herself. A good heart doesn't need the world's permission to be good, though even those words felt fragile in that moment. She didn't see Colton approaching until his shadow fell over her, quiet and concerned. He knelt beside her without asking questions, his presence steady like the earth beneath her feet. When she finally lifted her face, eyes tear-stained and glistening, she tried to brush the emotion away, but her voice cracked as she said, "They think I'm here to trap you, but I'm not. I'm not here to marry anyone. I just want to cook." The wind picked up just then, carrying the faint scent of rain even though the sky still glowed pale blue, and Colton felt something deep and protective stir inside him. He reached out but stopped halfway, uncertain if he had the right to touch such a wounded, resilient soul. The air between them grew quiet and thick, the unsaid words curling like smoke around their shoulders. That night, he barely slept, replaying her trembling voice in his mind as he lay on the porch staring at the stars. He thought of how the town treated her, how quickly they mocked what they did not understand, and how fiercely he wanted to shield her from their cruelty. At dawn, he saddled his horse before the sun even breached the ridge, heart pounding with a decision he hadn't fully spoken aloud yet. When Naeli stepped out of the cabin rubbing her sleepy eyes, he reached for her hand without explanation and whispered, "Ride with me. Please." She hesitated, surprised by the urgency in his voice, but something in his tone made her climb behind him without question as the horse carried them toward the waking town. Lone Creek was already buzzing with gossip when they arrived, the baker's wife nudging the blacksmith as they dismounted in front of the saloon. Colton kept Naeli's hand in his, her fingers slender and uncertain within his grip, as he stepped into the center of the street. People began to gather instinctively, sensing a declaration coming, the way animals sense a shift in weather. Colton inhaled deeply before speaking, his voice carrying a quiet thunder as he said, "She isn't here to trap me. She isn't here to trick anybody. She is here because I want her here. And because—" His voice trembled not with fear but with truth, and the hush that fell over the crowd made Naeli's pulse echo in her ears. "I want to marry her," he said, his confession settling over the street like warm rain after a long drought. Naeli froze, her breath catching as the world around her blurred, her heart slamming against her ribs as if unsure whether to flee or bloom. People stared in stunned silence, unable to comprehend how a man like Colton Reyes could fall in love with a woman they barely respected. She turned to him, disbelief shimmering in her tears, and he gently knelt in the dust, not with grandeur, but with sincerity so profound it shook something loose inside her. Her wooden spoon slipped from her grasp and landed in the dirt, as though her old life had fallen away at the same time. Her yes came not in words but in the way she stepped closer, the tremble in her hand easing as she placed it in his. The mayor hurriedly gathered witnesses, old Joe wiping his eyes because he'd always believed the lonely cowboy deserved a softer life. The makeshift ceremony unfolded beneath the open sky, with wind carrying their vows like petals drifting toward a river, and when Colton slid a simple silver ring onto her finger, her knees nearly gave in from the weight of being chosen. He leaned in, touching his lips to hers with tender reverence, the kiss slow and searching, as if memorizing the shape of her first breath as his wife. Colton lifted her into his arms afterward, her laughter breaking free like birds startled into flight, and the townsfolk watched in stunned curiosity as he carried her to his horse. The ride back to the ranch felt dreamlike, wind in her braids, his arm steady around her waist, the horizon glowing warm as if blessing their union. At the cabin, he carried her over the threshold with a quiet joy that made her hide her smile in his shoulder, and when he set her down, they held each other as though their hearts had finally found the place they belonged. The lantern flickered soft gold around them, casting gentle shadows that danced like childhood memories returning home. That night, they moved around the small kitchen like two flames learning to sway together. He chopped vegetables awkwardly but happily, brushing her fingers accidentally on purpose, while she mixed spices with a blush warming her cheeks. When they sat to eat, silence wrapped them in a tender cocoon, broken only by shy laughter and glances that lingered longer than before. They fell asleep in each other's arms, not out of passion but out of the deep, aching relief of finally feeling safe. In the stillness, Nayeli whispered a dream she had never dared say aloud. One day, I want my own bakery. Colton held her closer, already imagining the scent of fresh bread drifting through the town like a promise waiting to be kept. Days turned into weeks, and their life settled into a gentle rhythm soaked in small joys. Nayeli cooked while humming soft melodies her mother once sang, and Colton often paused mid-work just to watch her silhouette glowing in the doorway. They shared quiet breakfasts on the porch, taking turns feeding crumbs to the birds, and gentle evenings by the fire, her head resting on his shoulder as he carved little wooden animals for the children in town. Each day, their bond deepened not through grand declarations, but through shared tasks, small gestures, and every soft glance that bridged their past loneliness. Slowly, the town began to shift like soil turning after rainfall. Mrs. Calder, once harsh, arrived with old baking pans and an apology that wobbled but was nonetheless sincere. Sheriff Brooks offered to escort her safely on busy market days. Even the gossiping mayor's wife began buying her biscuits, humbly admitting they were the best in the territory. With Colton's steady encouragement, Nayeli opened her bakery in a small corner building near the well, naming it Greywind Bakery. Her breads became known for their warmth, soft centers, and the touch of love that only life's hardships can teach, and soon every home in Lone Creek smelled faintly of her creations. One evening, as the sun melted into a soft pink horizon, Nayeli stood at the doorway of her newly opened shop, apron dusted with flour and heart overflowing. Colton approached from the street, his boots echoing on the wooden planks, and wrapped an arm around her waist before kissing her forehead with the tenderness of a man who had found everything he didn't know he had been missing. She leaned into him, watching townsfolk pass with warm greetings rather than mocking whispers, realizing the world had shifted not because they accepted her, but because she had finally accepted herself. She took a breath filled with bread, dusk, and destiny, feeling reborn in ways she once feared were impossible. She looked out at the last shimmer of daylight, eyes soft with gratitude, and whispered to the growing dusk that life has its way of breaking us only so it can remake us with stronger seams. And as her gaze drifted to the reader, yes, to you, her voice carried the quiet wisdom of someone who had walked through fire and come out holding a loaf of warm hope. She wanted you to know that sometimes the world misjudges gentle souls, but gentleness is not a weakness. It is the courage to remain kind in a cruel place. And if ever you find yourself wandering like she once did, heart-hungry for a place to belong, remember that even the loneliest roads can lead you somewhere that feels like the first real breath of your life.